Well, today we are in for such a treat. Welcome to the show, Jeannette LoVetri. You are an absolutely remarkable human being. You are a trailblazer. You are a legend. You are one of the most recognized singing teachers in the world, one of the most recognized faces in our singing voice community, and it is such an honor having you on the show. How are you?
I'm good. Narissa, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I couldn't be more delighted and
Oh,
honored with the opportunity to share fun voice information. I'm always up for that.
you,
And I feel like, uh, my my young self had no idea I was ever going to end up having these kinds of conversations. So it's always fun. So thank
mm.
you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. We actually met in around, I think, either 2014 or 2015 when I interviewed you for my doctoral research.
Yep.
And you were a participant in my research study.
Yeah.
And then I'll never forget the first time we met face to face
Yes.
was in Florence. And
Oh,
I've,
right.
yes, about 2015 at PVOC, and I
Mhm.
was presenting the early results of my research on CCM, and who's in the front row but the CCM queen, Jeannette LoVetri. And can I tell you, not only did I have butterflies, but I had butterflies flying in formation that day. I was so nervous to speak in front of you. It was probably one of the scariest moments of my career. But you were so kind, and you always are so kind.
Well, I feel like it's so joyful to see the next generation coming along, being enthusiastic about this idea of contemporary commercial music, being enthusiastic about training voices to sing all kinds of stuff. That's what any teacher wants, is the next generation to carry on the work and go further. So I know people tell me I intimidate them, but it certainly isn't my intention. My intention is to be supportive and congratulatory, because that's the only way anything is going to change, is to move
Yes.
it forward.
Yes, I
And
wasn't so much intimidated that I found you scary. It was more that I was scared that I would say something that wasn't correct because you knew so much more than what I did. And you were leaps and bounds, and you were like my rock star in CCM, and I didn't want to let the community down, and you were there, and you were listening to every word, and it was more about that rather than you being a scary person, because we've met a number of times over the years overseas in Philadelphia as well
yeah.
at Care of Professional Voice Symposium. And sorry, I'm going to sneak this little story in
Well,
because it's
I have another one I want to stick in
okay.
also.
Yes.
I was presenting a workshop in the south of the United States, and
Hmm.
the other person who had been invited to present was a man whose name was Orrin Brown. Now,
Yes.
Orrin was a pioneer of
Hmm.
voice work
Yes.
from like the 40s, and was a teacher of Metropolitan Opera stars. He was at our Juilliard Conservatory. I mean, there was no one in higher esteem than Orrin Brown. And I was going to teach in front of him. He went first, and then I went. And I had the same feeling, like, I hope I don't say anything wrong. I hope I don't say anything he doesn't like. And at one point, he had this rich, low baritone voice. He said, Miss LoVetri, I think you mean the blah 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 blah. And I was like, oh yes, Professor Brown, thank you for correcting me. Thank you for that. And in my head, I'm going,
Oh my gosh. That would have thrown you?
well, it
Oh.
was a little tiny. I didn't state it as correctly as it could have been, and
Hmm.
he was very gracious about how he made the correction, and I was glad he made it. But I also had those butterflies. It's the same way. That was true. So
Oh,
I understand. And he was the
yes,
nicest person you could ever know. So I
yes.
get it.
Well,
Okay, so
Jean,
now what were you going to talk about?
oh, I was just going to mention, I'm going to try and make this really quickly because this is about you. It's not about me, but this
Okay.
does involve you. One time we were at Philadelphia and we were having a lunch break, and the next session was a session I was about to present in. And you were there with your beautiful husband, Jerry, having
Hmm.
lunch. And I marched over to you and I said, Jeanie, my presentation goes for 11 minutes. And you said, no, 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 you can't do that. This is my poor American accent. You know, it's 8 minutes and then there's, time for the changeover. And I said, Jeanie, I have traveled from Australia. I am not going to be cut short. I am going to speak for 11 minutes and you can ring the bell and you can do whatever you like, but I ain't stopping. And I remember your face and you went, okay. I don't know if you remember this.
I
And
don't.
and then there's the little light that goes from
Mhm.
green to amber to red
Right.
so that
Yeah.
you know to stay on time. And
Right.
you were chairing the session with a European gentleman, obviously a
Hmm.
classical singer because he looked
Yeah.
very formal.
Yeah.
And so I was presenting, and in my peripheral vision, as the amber light turned to red, I could see him starting
Yeah.
to get a little bit antsy. And you
Uh-huh.
put your hand over his hand and you stopped him.
I don't remember that at all.
You do, oh my gosh.
No.
Because I remember telling our good friend Irene Bartlett that
Yes.
what I'd done, and she couldn't believe it. And I just thought, well, that was my moment of being a brazen Australian.
Yeah.
But it worked. I got my 11 minutes in.
That's good.
There
That
you go.
counts. That's
That's it.
wonderful.
If you don't ask, you don't receive in life. That's
That's
what
right.
I figure. Yes. But
Yes.
anyway, Jeanie, let's get back to you.
Okay.
Let's start with you and you growing up. So, did you grow up in a musical family? Was singing that you something that you started doing at a very young age?
Yes. My mother sang a little bit professionally when she was young, but her sister was a professional singer with a big
Oh,
band
mm-hmm.
and traveled around in the United States with the big band for, I don't know, a number of years. I don't remember. And then my dad had a nice voice and he would sing when he was doing stuff at home. So singing was a very normal and natural behavior. And I can remember as a child, if I was in the tub, say, my mother and I would sing together. We would sing different songs that she knew. And so I just thought that was something that everybody did. Everybody would sing. It wasn't anything we fussed over. And then I belonged to the Brownies. That's an
Yes,
organization from the Girl Scouts. It's for the little
yes.
kids.
We had that
And
here
there
too.
was a meeting where the teachers had the children were allowed to say what was their favorite activity or toy or what was their favorite thing to enjoy. And I decided that I would say it was one of my favorite things was singing. So I got up and I sang When Irish Eyes Are Smiling.
Oh,
And I was probably about 7 or 8. And I didn't think anything of it. You know, some kids were talking about their bicycles or something else they had. And I sang and then I sat down. But when the meeting was over and the kids went outside, my mother was there to pick me up and take me home. The women who were the leaders of the troop said, "Oh, Mrs. LoVetri, your little girl has such a beautiful voice and she can sing so well." And my mother was as surprised as I was because she didn't think anything about it either.
mm, mm.
So from that, it was like, well, the LoVetri kid can sing. Okay. So throughout school, as there was ever a time for somebody to sing something, they would point to me. And I was a little bit, sort of not happy about that because it made me stick out. And it
Yes,
wasn't always, sometimes the other kids would make fun of me because of that. But over time, as I got into like maybe about 14, we had a lot of chorus in school and I sang the solos and the chorus things. And people kept saying, "Oh, your daughter has such a nice voice; she should take singing lessons." So finally, when I was about 15 or so, my parents found a singing teacher in the area, And we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, my dad had a low-level job, and my mother didn't work, so for them to pay for lessons was a lot. It was a big deal.
Hmm.
But they managed to come up with enough money for me to start singing lessons. And the woman who was my teacher was a very lovely person, and I just went along and learned whatever she was teaching. And she told me I had to learn how to sing Italian art songs, and okay, whatever that is. And
Yes.
so gradually went on. And then in high school, uh, the town that we lived in was a very wealthy town, and they had very good public schools because of the fact that there was money. And the choir director of the high school had a big reputation, and the chorus had won prizes in competitions. So he was one of the people that was encouraging to me. And the other music teachers in the school were saying, this is something that you should really seriously think about. So when it came time to find out about going to college, I applied to the two schools here in New York City that were music conservatories. One was Juilliard, which I did not get into, and the
Mm.
other one was Manhattan School of Music. Both schools are
Oh,
still
yes.
here.
Yes.
And I got into Manhattan School of Music, and I had no idea really what a music conservatory was.
Right. You
Well,
just felt it was the place to be.
the people who were knowledgeable, the guidance counselors and the others, they were saying you should do this. And my parents didn't know any better, so we went, oh, okay.
Okay.
So I arrived at this conservatory and taking lessons there, and it wasn't a very good fit. It didn't
Really?
suit, no, it didn't suit me at all.
Why was
Um,
that?
oh, there were a lot of reasons. I think because I was very unsophisticated as a young teenager. I also wasn't particularly knowledgeable about what does it mean to sing classical music. And if there had been at that time a degree in music theater, then I probably would have been fine.
Hmm.
But trying to be an opera singer was something that I don't think it was a good fit.
Right.
And my primary voice teacher was from Germany. She was a Wagnerian soprano, so she had this
Hmm.
big, huge voice,
Hmm.
and she didn't know what to do with my little pipsqueaky soprano. She was like, "Oh well, you don't seem to know very much, dear.
Oh
You
my
don't even know
gosh.
how to breathe." I'm like, "Ew."
My gosh. Well, that's really positive reinforcement. That's a great way to teach.
Anyway, I lasted only 1 year, and then I quit. And my father said, "Well, I'm not sending you to any more colleges, so get a job." So I did. And I started taking ads in the local newspaper, classified ads. So if you were going to sell your bicycle, I'd take your ad. And I started to go into the city for lessons privately. And once a week, I'd come into New York and take lessons. That didn't go very well either,
Really?
because because the teachers that I found, which were, asking somebody to recommend a teacher, they didn't really know what to do with me. And I studied with a woman who also had been a big opera singer, and the woman whose lesson was before mine on a Saturday, I would come in on the train. She had the biggest, loudest voice you could ever imagine. And then after her lesson was over, I would come in with my little
Oh my gosh.
and this teacher was like, "Oh, did you hear that woman whose lesson was before yours? What a magnificent voice she had." And I was like 19 and was like, "Yeah, okay, uh-huh." Mm. And then after a while working with her, one day she told me I had a deformed tongue. And I was
Okay.
heartbroken
A
because I thought,
deformed tongue.
yeah, I thought, "Oh, well, no wonder I'm not getting anywhere. Like, why didn't anybody ever tell me that before? I mean, I'm 19 years old. I should have known that by now." So I was crying all the way home, and an hour on the train. And then somewhere in the back of my mind, the little voice went, "That's crazy." And I
Thank
thought,
goodness.
oh, wait, I've been singing since I was 7 years old and nobody threw tomatoes at me. Maybe that's not what's going on here. So that was the first moment that I realized I guess I'm going to have to figure this out for myself,
Wow.
because some of these teachers said the craziest stuff. And the one before, the one in between those two, she was like, "Oh, everything you do is marvelous, my dear." And so I'd go and pay for the lessons, and I didn't learn anything because all she could tell me was how good I was. So I thought, that can't be. I mean, there must be lots more for me to learn, but she couldn't tell me what it was.
So you had two
So,
extremities. You had one
yep.
teacher who was telling you how brilliant you were, and the other teacher tearing you apart.
Right.
Well,
So I
you
knew it
know
couldn't be
what?
either
Uh,
of those. You
Yeah,
had to be
yeah.
in between, right?
Yeah, but you know what? In some crazy way, maybe it was just as well you had that other kind teacher because maybe you needed a little bit of that positive reinforcement somewhere, come from
Yes.
somewhere.
Yeah, and I didn't really have a lot of, I mean, my parents were supportive, but they were uneducated people and they didn't really have anybody around that was educated. So I didn't have any support in that sense.
Mm,
And then there wasn't anybody who was musically around that was more knowledgeable. So I was always kind of past that point, I was on my own. And I just flailed around and made my way as best I could. But eventually I moved into New York. And once I got here, I began to meet more people who were professional. And around that same period of time, um, I had been involved in music theater in the town that I lived in, where the people doing it were New York professionals. They were Broadway professionals who lived in the suburbs where I lived, about an hour. I was about an hour outside of New York City. So I had very good exposure to these New York professionals, and I started teaching other kids, young people, teenagers. And by the time I came to New York, I was 26. Um, Almost immediately, I got some students, and I was basically just saying what seemed like common sense, like, "Oh, when you sing that, you should open your mouth more," or, "Oh, there's a way to use your breathing so that you can make your belly muscles work better." And
okay.
just that was enough to help people, you
Okay.
know.
So you were basing what you were teaching at that time on what you felt was working for you, perhaps?
I
Things,
was
yeah.
just trying to do what seemed to me common sense and simple.
Mm,
And, like, oh, well, if you're going to sing that, maybe you should hold on to the note for longer. Nothing fancy. But if you're working with people who don't know anything and they're young kids, I didn't hurt anybody.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wasn't trying to produce great opera divas. I was just helping them learn music. And I did all right.
Mm,
So, again, I was trying to take lessons. I was going to auditions. Occasionally I'd get a job. I did a big ensemble piece at Lincoln Center, and I performed with those people in different venues here in New York. And I began to meet people and get more knowledge about what was what. And
mm.
really, the only kind of training there was toward classical music. Whether you wanted to or not, that's where you went and you got your lessons, or you just went to acting school, or you became a
Yes.
speech pathologist. But there wasn't any training that was aimed
Mm.
at music that wasn't classical.
So up
So,
until that point, when you had that classical training, had you been exposed to that music?
yeah, I mean, I sang all the things that you learn. I learned Italian and French
Yeah.
and German art songs, and I learned arias from opera and oratorio. And I sang in local churches. I sang at weddings. I sang in church when I played the organ for 10 years. I sang before and after church. Uh, Pretty much here and there. I also was involved in a few more musicals in Connecticut. Then when I came to New York, I got in a few little off Broadway things.
Hmm.
Every All of the experiences that I had were all over the map. I did some of this, then I did some of that. I went over here, then I went over there. And everybody else my age was in college, learning in a sequential way in an academic circumstance, it was very good that I didn't do that,
Here, here.
because it would have put me into that mold of the
Yeah.
academic mindset. And
Yes.
first of all, I really was never comfortable with that. But secondly, it would have only exposed me to a certain way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Being on my own all the time and going from this teacher to that teacher, from this class to that class, from this performance to that performance, at the time seemed very chaotic. It seemed like, ah, oh, geez, I can't go in a straight line. But ultimately, looking back at it, it was very good because it exposed me. I sang for 5 years with a Broadway based gospel group. And when I first joined it, I didn't know anything about that music. But because I sang with other people for 5 years, I learned about it.
Mm.
And I was never really a singer that you would say, oh, I'm a gospel singer, but I sang in the ensemble with everybody in the background. I sang for the artists at that time. A lot of these people were Broadway performers and sang for fun in these gospel groups. And then I was uh, teaching uh, young Broadway performers started in 1980. So one of the first students that I had was in the revival of the musical 42nd Street.
Oh, yes.
And um, so once I started working with her, she sent me other people from Broadway. And so I was suddenly dealing with that. And everything kept moving around all over the place. And I always was at the attitude of, okay, let me see what this is. Let me
And
figure this
let's
out.
figure it out.
Let's figure it out.
Let's figure it out. That's been my career too. I totally
Yeah.
get that. And you've been in the trenches, so to speak, because you've actually done the work. So not
Mhm.
only so you actually were living and creating those sounds
Yeah.
and not learnt them out of a textbook.
Oh no. And when I first came to the auditions in New York for Broadway or off Broadway, and they would say, well, can you belt? And I would go, yeah,
Yep.
sure. And I would like just sing loud because that's what I could
That's what
do.
you thought, yeah.
And I was, for a while, I thought, oh, good for me, I can do this. But then after a while, I noticed that my voice was tired. Plus, at that same time, the classical people were trying to get me to sing more dramatic material, bigger, heavier roles.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pushing to sing, and I didn't realize it. I mean, I didn't know that that wasn't good. And so the combination of the two things, after a while, when I would go to use my voice, I had a lot of problems. And I started to feel very depressed about, why can't I sing better than this? I didn't have enough information to realize that there was a reason.
Yes.
And none of the teachers that I had, all of whom were very prestigious and well educated, musically speaking,
Mm-hmm.
actually said, you know what, you need to go have your vocal folds looked at by a doctor. Nobody said that. In fact, the last teacher said to me, oh, he said, I think you just need to sing new material. And I said, no,
Oh,
no. I said, there's something else going on. It doesn't feel right. He said, well, you sound okay. I said, well, I know I sound okay, but that's something is not right. And
didn't
he said,
feel
oh,
right.
you're just being fussy. And this
Oh.
was the man I had studied with for like 6 years. I mean, I was, and I thought, I can't explain it, but something isn't what it needs to be. And I don't know what to say about it.
Mm.
So again, I was on my own, and I was 29. I'd been studying for 15 or so years.
Yes.
Some of these teachers were very famous, very expensive.
Yes.
And I was lost, just lost. And I
Mm.
thought, well, if this is what it takes to learn how to be a good singer, I might as well just quit, because I'm never going to figure this out. But
Mm.
then in the back of my mind was that voice, you got to sing, you got to sing. And my mother used to say, I want you to sing something for me. And say, oh, Mom, no, no, come on, I want to hear you sing. So I was walking around very depressed and having all kinds of problems with my throat. And then somebody said to me, you know, you should go to this thing called the Voice Foundation. at Juilliard. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, oh, it's a conference and people present about the voice. You should go.
Mm.
So I was very broke and very depressed. And I had to really scrimp and save to get the money to go. But I did go. And then I came into this lecture hall. It was at Juilliard at the time.
Yes.
And they were talking about the larynx and vocal folds. And they were talking about vibration patterns. And I thought, wow, what is this? So you have to remember, this is 1978.
Yes, yes. I my first experience at that conference, I felt exactly the same. That's why I'm laughing. I'm going, what the hell are they talking about? What language are they speaking? So I'm
Yeah.
totally getting it. Yeah.
So I sat next to a young woman who looked like she was about my age. And she said she was a speech pathologist. So we struck up a conversation and we were looking at these slides. And I said to her, what's that? And she said, oh, that's the larynx. I said, what are those white things? Oh, those are your vocal cords. Oh, vocal cords. Wow.
Wow.
And what does that mean? Oh, she said, well, that's a chart that shows how the voice is making, acoustic spectrum. I said, acoustic what? So she was like my first exposure, and I was able to ask her some questions. She was very patient, and I came away thinking, wow, I don't know anything. I don't know. I've been singing for how many years? 20 something years, and I don't know a thing. Nothing.
Yes, yes.
But I realized, okay, these people are talking about something real, and they're not talking about imagine the sound is coming out of your nose like an elephant trunk, dear. Or I had one teacher say to me, now the sound should be wider than your cheekbones. So you must
Oh
make
my
the sound
God.
wider than your cheekbones.
Is that the
So
craziest thing you were told?
oh no, plenty more other wacko things. But I closed my eyes and I pictured, okay, wider than my cheekbones and then sing. So whatever that was, oh no, dear, that wasn't it. So then I look, I'm looking back at that and I think, who can learn anything that way?
Yes.
And so when I was finally able to get enough information from reading whatever was available, now this is prior to there was no internet. You had to go to the library. You had to find a book you could read that made sense. Then if you had questions, I didn't have a professor. I had to go wait until I saw somebody at the conference and say, "Can I ask you a question? Could you tell
Mm-hmm.
me exactly what this means?"
Mm.
And so I spent 10 years in between uh, the symposium, which was once a year, trying to get information from books or magazines. And then when I would go to the symposium, I would be like a raving crazy person, because anybody that was friendly, I'd say, "Oh, can I ask you a question? Oh, could you explain this to me? Oh, I saw your presentation. Were you saying that?" And they were kind. They were explaining things to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went to the workshop sessions, which they still have a day where various people teach different kinds of singing, and the speech pathologists work with patients, and sometimes the doctors do presentations of an exam. I would go to these workshop presentations, and some of them were done by the Juilliard faculty, very well known, and
Yes.
they were just awful.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing. There was this woman who was at faculty. She was an older woman, very, very well known. And she had this poor student. He was up in front of the room full of people there. And she says to him, relax, relax.
Oh,
Don't you know you're not relaxed? And I thought,
oh
geez,
my God,
who could be
that's
relaxed when somebody's yelling at you like
I
that?
know, right?
And so she says, I want you to lean over, fall over forward, and you just breathe. And then she's pushing on his back. And I sat there, I thought, well, you don't have to be a psychologist to think this is not going to help him relax. And then I went and watched one of the teachers who was he was a Broadway cabaret specialist. So I thought, oh, good, let me go and see that. That's really what I'm interested in. And he's working with this person and he's telling her, to just talk and sing at the same time. And I could see she's struggling, and I'm thinking, well, she doesn't really understand what to do with that as an instruction. She's classical. She's not used to speaking and singing in the same mode. And I walked out of that session and I thought, I know I'm only 29, but I know better than what I just saw. Just
Good
plain
on
common
you.
sense.
Yes.
This is not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so that made me very angry.
So when are we talking here?
I'm still like around 79, 80, maybe
Really? Wow.
81.
Okay. Okay.
And so I decided that I would go every year to the symposium and I would go to all these classes. And in the meantime, I was still reading and I was still carrying on. And then into the 80s, I would go every year, I talk to people. I began to understand a lot more. And I was still teaching and not so much performing anymore, but doing a lot of teaching and attending conferences for singing teachers. And um, I remember one year the Voice Foundation was not in New York; it was in Denver. It was just the one time; it was not here before it moved to Philadelphia, where it is now. And this guy was working with a classical baritone, and my ex-husband is a classical baritone, and I knew this repertoire because of him.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher is banging on the piano, going, "You're not listening to the note. You're not listening to the note." And I'm thinking, well, the man is singing very difficult classical aria. He's got to hear the note. That's not the problem. The problem was the guy's throat was very tight and he was struggling to reach the note, so he was slightly flat because his
Yes.
throat was tight.
Yes.
So I was sitting there with all these people taking notes, and the poor man is struggling, and I just lost it. And I raised my hand and I said, "Excuse me, how do you know he can't hear the note? Did you ask him?" And then he said, "Oh no, now it's just fine." Everybody gave me dirty looks,
Of
and
course.
I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." I said, I just He said, "It's fine, dear. We're here to share all opinions." So he then had the young man sing an aria, and when he was in the music, all of those problems he had went away.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like I wanted to say, "Oh, well, suddenly like has a new larynx just because now he's singing music and he doesn't have those problems." Or was the problem what you were instructing him to do, that his throat was tight in the first place?
Mm.
And again, that was when I thought afterwards that this just doesn't work. And I actually went back home and wrote a letter complaining. This is not, I didn't pay a lot of money and travel all the way out to Denver, which for me at that time was an extremely huge expense to
Yes.
listen to people
Yes.
teaching
Yes.
who don't know what they're doing.
Yes. So did you write to Robert Saddleoff?
No, I wrote to Dr. Gould because Dr. Gould was still in charge at the time.
Okay.
Wilbur James Gould was the man who started the Voice Foundation. But as I as they were going on and I began to talk to people and know people, I think it was probably in like 1986 that Dr. Saddleoff began to take over. And one of the first things when I was speaking to him, I said, if you would ever like somebody to talk about music theater, I would be really honored if you would consider me. And he said, okay. He said, why don't you teach for the workshops next year? So that following year was the first time I was presenting in the workshops.
And was it the
And
first time they had a musical theatre representative?
no,
Okay,
that's
they
why this other guy, the guy that I had seen, the first guy that was cabaret music theater, who really was a very nice man who didn't know what he was doing.
mm-hmm.
And while I was demonstrating, Dr. Sumberg came in and was watching me teach. And then afterwards he said, "Yeah, that was very interesting what you're doing. I have never seen this." He said, "If you ever come to Stockholm, you should say I will do some research with you." And so
Wow.
I knew by then I had been attending the symposium for like 12 or 13 years. I knew who Dr. Sumberg
Mm-hmm.
was.
We
And
all
I
know
thought,
him.
gee.
Yes.
So I went home and I called somebody in Copenhagen who was someone I knew, who did singing. And I said, hey, can you make a workshop for me in like November? She said, yeah. So she cooked up a workshop for me in Denmark, in Copenhagen. And I was able to call Dr. Sundberg and say, guess what, Dr. Sundberg, I am going to be close by. I'm going to be in Copenhagen. You said you would be interested in having me come to your lab. Is that still true? And he said, yeah, you could come maybe in November. I said, yes. I said, I can do that. So that's what happened. I taught the workshop in Copenhagen,
Oh,
and I took the ferry over to Aarhus, which now they have a
mhm.
bridge, but then it was a boat.
Yes.
And he spent 5 days studying my throat, just me.
Really?
Uh huh.
So
And
what
he
was
had,
he doing? Was it like stroboscopy or
yeah, it
what?
was a nasal stroboscopy, and I
Mhm.
was going, well, I was, what he saw me do was I was talking about singing like a classical singer. And then I would, go to a belty place, ba boo da ba ba da ba ba, and then sort of mix was in da 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 da. Well, he had never seen anybody do that before. That was completely unknown to him. He was used to working only with classical singers, and at that time, that's all anybody did was classical singers. So we spent a lot of time going in and out of classical or head register, and then belty chest, and some mix back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I stayed in his house, and I lived with his family,
That's
and
incredible.
I had a private tutoring with Johann Sundberg for 5 days.
That is incredible.
Uh-huh. And so I was able to ask all kinds of questions. And I had his book, and I would say, Dr. Sundberg, I don't understand this page. What does this mean? And he would tell me.
Mhm.
So by the time I came back, I really understood not only what was in the book, but what I was doing. And it really gave me confidence to say, okay, now I know what I'm talking about. And then I had seen the inside of my throat going back and forth in all these different sounds. And I could see that each one of them was a different configuration inside. So I thought, well, it's not like it's all the same. Everybody had always said, oh, classical training will prepare you for anything you want to sing.
And they still say that.
Yeah, of course they do. But of
They
course, we
still
know
say
that
that.
if you go to the opera house and you then
Mm.
take these opera singers and ask them to sing Rent, they can't, right?
Yes, yes,
So
exactly.
if that were true, why can't they? Shouldn't they be able to sing any kind of music? No, they can't. So that's just false. And so when I understood that, then as I was teaching and I was working with higher level people all the time, more and more professionals all the time, um, I also began to learn more about the styles and about the demands of the styles, and
Yes,
people sent me people. So when I was continuing to be in the workshops, people, some people who were attending the symposium saw me and said, "Oh, we would love for you to come and be our keynote speaker in our statewide conference in Virginia." And I said, "Oh, that would be lovely." So I went and I did a master class for the statewide conference. And then two of the women who were at that conference came and said to me, "Gee, we really like what you're doing. Could you come and teach at our school?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to do that." So they made arrangements for me to come and teach the couple of master classes with their music theater students. And by then, there were a number of schools that had begun music theater degree programs. So
yes.
there were finally programs that combined singing and acting and dancing in a degree.
Hmm.
And that school was Shenandoah Conservatory
Oh,
in
yes.
Winchester, Virginia.
Yeah,
And that was
beautiful.
where I went 4 times. And I was working with the undergrads mostly there. And the dean of the conservatory came to me one day and she said, we really like what you're doing, and it's not like what other people do. Can you write a course for other teachers? Maybe you could do during the summer. And I think it went back to that butterfly feeling, or so, that same feeling of
Yes,
the
yes,
butterflies flying information. I said,
yes.
I don't really know. I said, I mean, this is what I do, but I don't know if anybody else would want to do this. She
Yes.
said, well, would you try? And I said, yeah, I'll try. So I spent the whole year working on uh, the materials. And what I did was I went back in my mind, and every time I did a master class, wherever it was, I got the same questions over and over and over, the same
Mm,
questions.
yes.
What is belting, and how do you belt, and what's the difference between this breathing and that breathing, and why do we have to sing like this way over that and that way over here? So I just answered the questions by writing the course materials and just saying, well, okay, here's the information based on my life experience. And in 2002, I did the first course in July, and I was terrified, just terrified, because I thought maybe I'd have 10 people come, maybe 15. But then the next thing was people registered, it was 20. And the college said, well, how many do you want? And I said, I don't know. I said, well, can you handle 25? I said, I guess. And then, can you handle 30? Can you handle 35? And I thought, oh my gosh. So I
Mm,
ended up with 60 people. And I thought, how am I gonna teach 60 people for five days in a row from 9 to 5? How? Oh, and some of these people had doctoral degrees, and I thought, oh boy, this is going to be. They're going to really, like, I don't know. They're going to throw tomatoes at me for sure.
yes, yes. But it just goes to show that by then, so we're 2002. Now you created the term CCM in around 2000. So
Yeah,
in
yeah.
2002, there was already talk of CCM. And by then, you must have inspired curiosity within the singing voice community. And those people who were probably thinking what you were thinking, this music has to have its own training system,
Mm.
were probably so hungry by then for what you were going to deliver. And you would have been the only person out there that had any answers for them.
Well, the conference that was given by the New York Singing Teachers Association in conjunction with Mount Sinai Medical Center in the year 2000 was called something like mm, Singing Teachers in the New Millennium.
Okay.
And I was the opening speaker. And I had just done some research in 1999 with Dr. Ingo Tietze,
Mm-hmm.
who is also a very well known voice scientist,
Yes. Yes.
who was investigating the origins of vibrato in singers. So when I was with Dr. Tietze, I spent 4 days with him too, and got to ask him all kinds of questions. We talked a lot about every kind of singing thing, but life too.
Yes.
And they stuck electrodes in my vocal cords.
Oh my gosh.
So they had a medical doctor, and I had my throat had a hole in it where they put the wires for
Oh,
the
what?
electrodes. And
Is that an
so
EEG? Is that what
yeah,
that is? Yes. Okay.
EEG, right.
Yeah.
So I had 3 holes on one side and 4 holes on the other side where they were trying to put the electrodes on either the cricothyroid or the thyroretinoid while I was making sound.
Mm-hmm.
And you could literally see the wire sticking out of my
Oh,
throat
oh my
and
God.
from my inside the larynx. And I did this test that Dr. Tietze had thought of, and I was asked to sing specific pitches repetitively while they turned up the juice on my vocal cords. And so when they did the cricothyroid muscle, the head register sound, I was able to go all the way through the whole test. And at some point, I was also being asked to sing without vibrato. And so then past like 7 hertz, the vibrato began to show up, but I wasn't doing it. The
Mm-hmm.
machine was doing it.
It's just okay.
So when they did the thyroretinoid muscle, I'll never forget, the electrical stimulation ran all the way from my right eye socket up here, down through my nose, down through my throat, into my neck, and into my shoulder.
Was that
And
uncomfortable?
yeah. And I asked Dr. Smith, I said, he was the laryngologist doing this. I said, why do I feel this all the way up and down inside? And he said, oh, it's referred nerve stimulus. I said, wow, it's really strong. He said, yeah, it could be. So as I went through the same test when they were turning up the amount of electricity that was going through, past halfway, I couldn't phonate because if I tried to make sound, I would choke. I just would choke.
Oh my
So they had
gosh.
to stop. But having finished that as an experience, with Dr. Titsa, I did it because it was a way for me to learn more. I wanted to know, like, what happens when they electronically stimulate your vocal
Oh
folds.
my gosh.
And so I was willing to go where I had to go, wherever it
Mhm.
is, to find out more, to learn more. And when Dr. Sundberg published the research that he did with me, which was published first in Sweden and then published in the Journal of Voice, um, it was a breakthrough paper because no one had ever studied somebody who could sing in so many different ways. And it really sort of opened up the idea that there's more than one way to sing. And then my statement in 2000 was, I'm not going to say non-classical anymore. I'm going to say contemporary commercial music
So,
because
yeah, sorry.
we don't want non-classical
No, no.
anymore.
Yes, exactly. So, in what forum or in what context did you introduce that descriptor?
Well, that was at the conference, the singing
Okay.
teachers in the new millennium.
Hmm.
And so there were like 300 people there, and Dr.
Were
Titsa
they
was there.
were they singing teachers or
Mostly singing
members
teachers, but
of?
there were some medical people. So there were a few speech pathologists, some medical doctors. The Mount Sinai's Grabscheit Medical Center is a endowed center within the hospital complex, which was set up by money left from the estate of Dr. Grabscheit, and he was a laryngologist for many, many years here in New York. And he treated just about every famous singer that there was.
Mm,
So this is a dedicated facility within the hospital, primarily aimed at voice patients.
yeah.
So it was a combination of the New York Singing Teachers
Mm.
Association and Mount Sinai, at which I was the opening speaker, and I stood up and said, "This is what I'm going to do." And I got a lot of pushback at first.
So
I
you
said,
got
"Well,
up there, sorry, and you said, okay, from this point on, we are not calling this music non-classical or music outside of classical. We are going to call it contemporary commercial music styles. Is
yeah."
that
And
what?
I said, "I am not going to any longer." When somebody says, "Well, what do you teach?" "Oh, I teach non-classical styles." I said, if somebody said, "Well, I teach non-medicine," or "I teach non-law," I said, that would be incredibly stupid.
Yeah,
What does
and it
that
makes
mean? It
no
doesn't,
sense.
no
Yeah.
sense. So I said, I'm not going to define what I do, but what I don't do. So this is what I'm going to call it. And I'm not going to use non-classical anymore. And so the word went out that I had created this terminology. And then when I was at Shenandoah, the first year I called it music theater, vocal pedagogy. But then the second year, I called it contemporary commercial music, and I named the institute the Contemporary Commercial Music Vocal Pedagogy Institute. And a lot of people said, "What is that? What is contemporary commercial music? What is that?"
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, it's the new way we're describing the music we used to call non-classical." And I made analogies with people that would object. I said, well, here in the United States, if you say contemporary music, you could mean either classical music or other styles of music that the composers are alive and it's happening right now. If you say commercial music, it generally means the music you would hear in a commercial venue, so like a club or a
Mm.
theater,
Or on the
and
radio.
or on the radio or television as a commercial. I
Yes.
said, so, the two terms together don't have a previous history. And that's why they need to be together, because one or the other does have a history, but the two terms together don't. And then people said, well, but there's other CCMs. I said, yeah, I know. We
Mm.
here have the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music, which is a very well known CCM. And we also have Contemporary Christian Music,
Yes.
which is a
Yes.
CCM.
That's the
And I
one.
said, but
Yep.
if you, by then we had the internet, I said, if you go online and put in the initial CCM, you'll get 45 organizations that are CCM. Contemporary Connecticut Council of Municipalities, and
Yes.
all kinds of other things like that. I said, so
Yes.
what's one more? It's one more.
That's all. One more
And
for the road.
so, yeah, the main thing that the reason that was important was because it broke the glass ceiling in the mindset of people who said, well, there's the real music, which is classical music, and then there's that other stuff that's not really anything, it's just
It's just,
non-musical.
yes.
And so I'm saying, well, excuse me, but that's just ridiculous. And the music that came out of Europe from the 1500s to the 20th century has its own validity, but some of the music that arose mostly in the United States came from the local people who created their own music in church or in the community or in their families. And a lot of that music was influenced by the people who came here and were enslaved. So the African and Caribbean peoples who were brought here, who brought very little with them, but they couldn't take away their music.
Their
That
soul. Mm.
that came with them because it came
Yes.
from their heads, their hearts.
Yes. Yes.
So while as music was uh, used, one of the few things that the enslaved people were allowed to keep was their music, which they still had to hide, but they would go into the woods and they had little small places where they would meet and they would sing. And so that came up from the bottom of the society all the way it bubbled up. And then at the beginning of the 20th century, when we began to have the very first microphones and the very first movies with sound, suddenly millions of people could hear music instead of just hundreds of people. And the music became very popular. So we had early jazz, and then we had the movies, and the vaudeville people became well known. So it has different roots, it has different origins than music which came from the church or from the aristocracy and the nobility and sort of filtered down from on high. And I said, if we look at this music, the only thing that's different is in each country, there is folk music, which is endemic to that culture. So, the folk music of Scandinavia is different than the folk music of Spain.
Yes.
And
Yes.
here we have folk music in different places that have different traditions. But other
Mm.
than that, we have the music that came from the people. And here in the United States, we have a very famous painter whose name is Grandma Moses. Now,
Right.
Grandma Moses' paintings now sell for millions of dollars. And she was one of the very first painters who was recognized in the art world for being an untrained artist who was very, very, very good. So she would sit in her farm and she would paint the area around her farm. And she painted very detailed paintings. And somebody saw them and go, wow, these are really, really wonderful.
Mm.
So she was brought into the art world and people began to celebrate her work and her, and she became more well known. And so she was, in a sense, a folk artist as a painter. And we all know, Andy Warhol was also considered, oh, he's just a pop person. He doesn't, what does he know? Tomato cans. And his painting of, or his print of Marilyn Monroe just sold at one of the big galleries here 2 weeks ago for $190 million.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
That's
So,
incredible.
yeah. So, in other words, the value of folk anything or the music of the people was gradually becoming more and more important. And at some point, it passed the classical world. So, classical was going down and becoming less well known and
Yes.
less universal.
Yes.
And the pop music was exploding all over the world. And especially in the 50s and 60s, it became, rock and roll became an international thing. So my point of view was, well, why do we have to try to force gospel singers and rock singers into this mode of what was worked for Mozart and for Scarlatti or even for um, Puccini and Verdi?
Mm.
How are they the same?
Yes.
And so, as you know, it's not gone. It's still not gone.
Yes.
That, oh dear, if you learn to sing classically, you can sing anything, That's not gone. But it's harder and harder for people to say that and get away with it.
Mm. But they still
They're
do.
Yeah.
They still try. They still give it a go. So at that time when you introduced CCM, did
Mhm.
you get pushback from
Oh, lot,
people from the
lot.
classical? What was the reaction from the classical world?
Well, I mean, I think the good news was that I was already outside their world a little bit. Yes, I did start teaching at a small college, like in 19, what, 85 maybe.
Mm.
But I wasn't a college professor. I didn't have a doctorate in education or something.
So you
And
weren't
also,
considered academic, so to
right.
speak.
And I was not somebody who had written a lot of books and papers. I mean, not back then. And so they could only push back on me a little bit because the good news was I didn't know I was self employed. And I was relatively successful as being self-employed here in
Hmm.
New York. So what was they going to do to me? Fire me? Well, you can't fire me. I don't work for you.
Yes. Don't you love that? What a great
And you can't.
position to be in.
You're going to deny me tenure? I don't. I'm not interested in your tenure.
Mm.
Are you going to say bad things about me? Well, so what? How's that going to hurt me?
Hmm.
I had already established myself in the profession through the organizations that are available because I could talk about what I was talking about in a way that made sense. The other thing that I did, and this is, I mean, I can't validate this, Marissa, but the other thing that I did was I was smart enough to keep my classical singing in good shape. Okay.
Yes. Yes. So
So
those
if I,
people could see that you could make those sounds as well. It gave them a little bit of comfort, perhaps.
right, I was still part of that world enough so that if I sang something classically, they wouldn't go, ooh, that was disgusting. They would have to go, oh, well, that's pretty good.
Mm.
So things that my Mozart stuff, the light. I finally got to a place where I know I wasn't a big voice. I wasn't supposed to be singing a big material, but Mozart, Scarlatti, Handel, Bach, Mozart, all that was right for my voice. And as long as I stuck to that stuff, I was fine. So that kept going. And then when I went away from it and went da 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 da, they couldn't say, "Oh well, that's okay, but you can't really sing real music because we sing real music." And
Mm.
I kept the classical sound as good as I could, so they couldn't say that about me.
Did you feel
And
that
that
you needed to do that, or was
I
that just
did.
serendipitous?
No, no, it was very deliberate and necessary.
Mm. Very
And
clever.
I'd asked people, I said, when you came to my course the first time, if I had sounded really bad singing classical literature, would you have paid any attention to anything else I said? And they all said no.
Mm.
So that in a way, I mean, I was being very aggressive. I'm going to cough. Hold on. I was being very aggressive in saying to, like, I'm getting up and I'm going to sing Mozart in a way that you're going to respect. And then I'm going to belt. And then I'm going to sing other styles. I mean, I lived in music theater. That was my whole life. And I didn't say it out loud, but the unspoken implied statement was, okay, can you sing that Mozart better than I just did? Oh, you can't. Hmm. Can you do this other stuff too? Oh, you can't. Hmm.
Mm.
See, so that was my protection in a way.
You know what comes to mind? Let he who is without sin cast the first stone.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's still true. Even now, 73, I don't sing like I did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But when I want to demonstrate, I can.
Yes.
And people say to me, how do you keep that going? And it's like, well, I've never done anything in my throat that my throat shouldn't have done. I respected the boundaries and limits of my instrument, but then I was able to get my instrument to make various kinds of sounds in different styles. So it never had to, well, it did in the beginning. I had to overdo, no, I had to overcome a lot of really bad training where I
Mm.
sounded like I was 60 years old when I was 27. But once I got out of all that, as long as I stayed within the comfort zone of this body, which is right now I'm very heavy because I'm older, but when I was young, I was very small. As long as I didn't try to compete with somebody who was a 400-pound alto,
Yeah.
my throat was okay.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that um, the colleges were able to trust my coursework because it's grounded in science and because it's grounded in research and because of the experience I had working with and learning from the doctors and the speech pathologists and the voice researchers, but also because when I get up to sing, I can really still sing.
Mm.
And so the proof, I always say the proof is in the singing.
Exactly.
If you're
And
going to
I've
talk to
heard
me
you
about
sing. Yes.
performance and resonance is great. Now sing for me and show me how that works when you sing. And I'm interested in singing honestly. Sing from your heart, sing from your soul, sing something that's meaningful to you. I want to hear your voice expressing your point of view through your mind. Otherwise, you're just making sound. And
Mm.
there's a lot of classical training here in the United States, which is about give me the sound, 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 give me the resonance, give me the breath support,
Yes.
give me the sound.
Yes. Yes.
And oh, yeah, you have to express something good. But there's
Yeah.
not a lot of emphasis on, listen, this is a very sad piece. How do you sound? How do you personally sound when you're sad?
Mm. Mm.
Now, can you feel that sadness and still sing? Because that should be your goal.
Yes.
So we've all heard really what I would call bad singing. Oh, I'm singing you my opera voice. And nobody believes any sound like that because that's not a human being's normal expression.
Mm.
And in
See,
the classical world,
yeah, CCM
they
audiences would not accept that because it's the complete opposite. We're quite happy to accept imperfections as
right.
long in singing, as long as the person is being authentic.
Yes.
And we want to see their heart and their soul. We want to be
Mhm.
able to look in their eyes, feel what they're feeling. We want to hear it in their voices. We want it real. We don't care about perfection to
No.
that and that legato beauty of tone. We want the real person. We want the real deal.
But it isn't really necessary to, they're not in opposition to each other once you
No,
understand what they are. And so you could be, you could play two different instruments. You could be good at tennis and also at golf. As long as you understand what the parameters of that particular activity is and you get good at
exactly.
them, you can manage.
Mm,
The the stylistic ingredients in each of the CCM styles is particular to that style. So a
Exactly.
rock singer is going to ask for different things than a jazz singer of what they're doing vocally, or somebody who's singing country music as it is here in the United States is maybe not going to sound the same as a music theater singer. And that's also a point of contention because up until um, in the 80s, I guess, when there was research, the first research on belting, the idea that that research said that belting was twang. And here in the United States, the word twang always only referred to the music from uh, country
Country
music, from
music.
Appalachia and the southeast part of the United States. It represented how people spoke in what we would call the hills, mountains. And it had a kind of a banjo quality to it. Whereas belting was really here in New York was more like a trumpet. More like that sound carries. And that was a very different kind of sound. So the word twang was usurped, pulled out of its roots, and applied to something that made no sense, except in worlds where nobody knew any different. Nobody had that history. So when I first heard twang, I thought, oh, country music. And then, no, it wasn't country music. And so you have that unfortunate confusion with some of the terminology
Oh,
and other
yes.
things that people are being taught to maneuver their vocal cords in a certain way or squeeze this and pull that and lift these. And really the body doesn't like any of that. The
Mm,
body just wants to leave itself alone and sing.
mm.
And then the musical parameters, the acoustic parameters have to work with the style in your own voice. A lot of times with the young kids, they want to belt like they're 50 years old, and I say no, no. If you're 20, sound like you're a 20-year-old belter, not like you're a 90-year-old belter.
Yes.
And that particular ingredient that is classical in the traditional way, in that you only did certain repertoire by the time you grew into it over time. You didn't sing the biggest, most dramatic roles right away. You waited. You let your body and your voice develop over time. That's also true in ballet. You have the young ballerinas that grow up in the ensemble and they're taking class every day for years and years and years and years until they develop the stamina to do a long leading role like the Swan Queen in Swan Lake. They don't give that role to young women.
Mm.
Why? Because you don't have the stamina. And so there are elements of, I guess, vocal wisdom that can be taken from traditional classical singing and applied to contemporary commercial music styles when we're dealing with who is this voice, who is this body, who is this instrument, and then what can we get this instrument to do in a way that's authentic and healthy. So that's how the somatic voice work got born. And at the end of that first course in 2002, I got to the last hour of the fifth day, and I got all 60 people gave me a standing ovation.
That's
And I just stood
incredible.
there crying my eyes out
Oh,
because I thought, oh gosh, I guess they understood what I was talking about.
so
And
it
I
was a
didn't,
moment. It was a moment for you that all those years, all that learning, all that work that you'd done, having electrodes poking out of your neck, all that, you had been validated.
yeah. And when I, um, that the 1999 was the first year that I did research that I presented at the Voice Foundation, like you did when you did yours.
Yes.
And that also was the first year that I did a workshop, and so I was allowed to sing at the gala. So this formal gala with all the voice
I
scientists
yes, I've
and the
been there.
doctors, and then they always have a famous opera singer there.
Yes.
This that first year, the person who was the famous opera singer was a woman whose name was Licia Albanese, who had a huge career in Italy and the United States in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. And she was the guest of honor. So I got up, and the first thing I sang was the Mozart aria from Magic Flute, Pamina's aria Ach ich fühl's. And then when that was over, I sang Love Potion number 9.
Oh my, I love that.
And I was thin then, I was still thin. And I came out in a very elegant looking outfit, and I did, oh, so I did the whole thing. And when I finished the last note, Madame Albanese said in a loud voice, Brava. I thought, oh my
She didn't
God.
throw olive oil and tomatoes at you.
I was floored.
Yes.
And then I really did feel like, okay, I have been exonerated here.
Mm,
She
mm.
did not have to say a peep. And it was really that last note dying away and then this loud brava before anybody could applaud. And so I was recovering from this. But then I turned around and I had prepared ahead of time a little podium, kind of like a speaker's podium. And I took my outer fancy garment. It was like a vest, long vest. I took it off, I put it on the podium, and I reached under and I got a black leather vest and a
Oh,
black leather um, newsboy cap. And
yes.
I did that very quickly. This change, I went out of the classical into this. I had on a
Mm.
black, skin tight black jumpsuit. So this thing went over me, and I turned to the guy in the corner who was the electronics guy, and I nodded, and it was like, "Ma, ba, ba. I took my troubles down to Madam Ruth," and the whole room was like,
Oh, that's unheard of in that context. Because I've been to those gala dinners, and they're full of pomp and ceremony,
"Yep."
and
So when it was,
everyone's watching P's and Q's, and everyone's
yeah,
so formal. Oh my goodness, yes,
when it was over, they were all very stunned, and I was so nervous before I sang.
of course,
I don't even have the words to say because I thought, boy, if I don't pull this off, if I don't make the classical piece impeccable, and then I don't sing this rock and roll thing like I really sing in rock and roll, I am going to fall flat on my face in front of all these
absolutely,
people.
yes.
And then the following year, I did research and I sang again. I was still very svelte. I had on a skin tight red dress, and I sang the Silver Dollar aria from the Ballad of Baby Doe, which goes up to a high C sharp, C sharp 6 at the end. And then I turned around and sang Under the Sea. And I did a little mambo while I was doing it. And when it was over, the guest of honor that year was the American baritone, classical baritone from the Met, Cheryl Milnes. And he came over and he said to me, where are you singing? And I said, in my kitchen. And he said, no, 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 I mean, where are you singing? Where are you performing? I said, in my kitchen. He said, I'm not singing anywhere. And he said, well, you should be. And I said, oh, thank you. I can't believe
That's
Cheryl
so,
Mills asked me where I'm
oh,
singing.
but you did
So,
it.
yeah, but see, this was all the stuff that came. I was already, well, I was 50 then. So this all came after a long, long time. And the the complexion of the profession at that time was still very much, you can either sing classical music or you can ruin your voice and sing that other stuff. And I was going to show them, no, that's not true.
Mm. And you did.
And so it meant a lot to me to sort of say, that's just it's a it's a wrong thought. You got to break that thought. And then after that, in 2006, there was a panel on contemporary commercial music at the Voice Foundation, which was hugely successful. And then it became more acceptable to start to do research on different kinds of singing, different kinds of styles. So now, if you look at the roster of the symposium, they have presentations on singing styles from India. They have Catalan music from Spain. They have all
Yes.
different kinds of versions of music theater.
Yes.
Uh, there's been presentations on rock music, but prior to what I did, that you would never have seen that. Never.
Well, you certainly paved the way then. That was incredible. That took courage, but the more you talk, the word resilient and tenacious keeps coming to mind. I think they're the two qualities, and I think part of that is probably the Italian heritage too.
Well, I am an Aries, and I have five.
Oh,
I have four planets and the North Node in Aries. So I am, the song. Once there was a little old ram, thought she'd punch a hole in the dam. No one could make the ram scram. She kept butting that dam, and that was the Frank Sinatra song in the 50s and 60s, and it's called High Hopes, and it's talking about the ram. This is never given up, and that is the persistence. And I have to say, Marissa, in all honesty, it was fueled by my anger. People used to say to me, "Gosh, you seem so angry." I said, "I am. I'm very angry. You would be too if you were
mm,
spoken to like, oh, you want to sing that music? Well, that's not music. Who wants
mm,
to sing that stuff?"
mm.
And that's why when I was in Australia the first time, which was in like 1994,
Really, that
I
early?
yeah, because Janice like brought me over there for two conferences, singing Broadway and popular music in '94 and '96, to Sydney, and that was my first encounter with Australian uh, training. And I thought then, and I still felt the same when I was there, like in 2019, that the Australians were much more open minded,
Yes,
much more willing to just look at singing as singing. I think a lot of that was Irene's influence.
definitely.
I think that Irene's also her bravery, her courage, and her tenacity was that she was talking about singing is singing. Singers are singers. Doesn't matter. And so that attitude, when I got there, was like, wow, this is
Mm,
different. I mean,
mm.
I didn't get as much of that. Well, I'm a classical singer. Well, what are you? Who are
Yes,
you?
yes,
And I came back and I talked about that here, and I said, when I was in um, Adele Nisbet's class,
yes, Adele's, yes.
I did a lecture in her pedagogy class, and here was this pedagogy class, and there were jazz singers and pop singers and classical singers all in the same class.
I did that
And I
class.
said, you don't, this doesn't happen in America. You don't get the classical people mixed in with the other people as peers. That's
Mm,
not happening.
mm.
And Adele said, yeah, well, that's just how we are here. So I came back here and I said, you people could learn something from the Australians. They have it together. And they looked at me like, whoa, who cares? We don't want to be like Australia. And I thought,
Yes. I know exactly. I didn't even know that there was this high art, low art mentality till I started attending a conservatorium. We call them a conservatorium here. And then when I went to these voice conferences and then reading some of the Facebook group forums that I didn't realize it was such a thing because
mm,
I had a very long and successful career as a
right.
CCM singer,
Yep.
and I couldn't understand why one they had these programs where these people didn't have a hope in hell of getting a job after they finished a program. They were
Right.
not going to be employable,
Right.
and this music is what sells.
Yeah, I
Classical
know.
music only constitutes 1% of music consumption,
Yep.
and all the other styles are 99%. So, where is this mentality coming from? Like, what is wrong
Well,
with people?
I know a man, very nice man, very highly respected as a teacher or pedagogue in one of our big universities, has done lots of research, very, very high level research. Great man, wonderful guy, can't sing, can't sing, has a reputation for being a terrible singer. And I once had a discussion with him in which he said, well, I consider it's my job to educate my students about the fine art of singing. And I said, but what about if you want to help them get a job? Well, he said, I don't concern myself with that. I said, well,
Oh.
because
Imagine,
these kids are spending
yeah,
thousands of dollars and they want
yes,
to be singers, and you don't care if they get a job. I
but
just thought that was the
that's
craziest thing I
ridiculous.
ever
It
heard.
is, because imagine doing a law degree and thinking, well, I won't have a job at the end of it. What?
Right.
You're still attending a university, you're still paying all the fees, you're still going there for the training for a job. So
Right.
it makes no sense. Now,
Well, they
when
look at job training as being beneath them. It's an
mm,
applied degree. Yes, you have a degree in voice. It's an applied degree. But oh, why would you want to work? I mean, that's so below you. You want to be an
oh,
academic.
so what do you do?
And
Go and work at McDonald's?
yeah, I guess. I mean, it's very strange as an attitude to talk to somebody who thinks that way. Now, I
Mm,
have to say, this particular teacher does have students who are professional singers who are out in the world, they're working, but it was like not part of his job as a college faculty to address whether or not their students could work if they want. And of course, if they don't want to work, they want to become academic. All right, that's fine.
that's
There's
fine.
nothing wrong with that. But not because they can't work, because you didn't prepare them for the real world where work happens. And
Mm.
that mattered to me. I wanted my method to be applicable in a very
Oh,
practical way.
sorry. Has that come up on your screen?
What? No, I don't see anything.
Sorry.
I,
Okay, something just popped up on my screen just randomly.
oh, no.
Okay, we're back. And
Well,
we're
anyway, so my goal is for the I'm not teaching privately right now, partly because I stopped during the COVID quarantine,
mm-hmm.
but also because I have had health issues myself, which have
Oh,
impeded my ability to get around,
okay.
mobile.
Yes.
So I've now switched over to webinars. I'm doing webinars, and we did our very first ever podcast. I don't think they've even been released yet. And then I do my summer institute. So I do the Somatic Voice Work Institute in July. We have it for the third year in a row online only, which was the college administration's decision.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so we won't be on campus. The college campus is very lovely. It's a small college on the outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm sorry, Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
Jeez, Cleveland. And we probably will be back in person next year. But this has been very successful because since we're online, you don't have to fly to the United States. You don't have to stay in a hotel. You don't have to pay for transportation on campus. And it's afforded a lot of people who would never be able to participate without paying for anything except the tuition.
Accept that.
And so we attracted people from all over the planet. And um, the atmosphere is very loving. Like, we have a lot of fun and people share, and there's a lot of welcoming. The young people learn from the older people learn from the young people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a way for us to learn and share. I mean, that was one of the great things about when I finally was in Australia. I was teaching up in Toowoomba, and Irene came in and did a guest session. And here's a woman who has given so much to the profession and is so kind, so down to earth, so absolutely available.
Yes, she
And
is.
she has her doctorate. She's at the conservatorium, but man, she just sing it. And I loved having that interaction with her because that's how it ought to be, you know?
Exactly, exactly. I think we can be less territorial in our community and less ego. And you have an amazing faculty as well. I see
I
your
do.
training program has grown, and it's inclusive of many things now. It's not just you, which I mean,
No,
you did a great job in pioneering all of that and establishing it. But now you have other teachers that are coming on board.
yeah. It was important for me to share the work with other people so that anyone's interested can realize, well, gee, gosh, I'll never be like Jeanie. I can never do what Jeanie does. And the idea is, no, you can't be me. You have to be you.
Mm,
But you can learn the same skills that I learned along the way without spending 40 years to collect them.
yes,
Let me shorten your journey a little bit. And
yes.
so we do have a medical lecture and a speech pathology lecture, and we have experts from jazz and music theater, and we have a movement specialist. And this puts everything in one place. And then the faculty, faculty is all over the map. So we have the people who teach in um, grade school, we have college teachers, we have choral director people. Uh, Jeff is our rock and roll guy.
Is that
Uh,
Jeff Costello?
yeah,
I
Jeff
see him.
Costello.
Yeah, yes, I see him
And
on Facebook.
so we have people with different
Yeah.
backgrounds, and uh,
And
that makes,
Trinice is one of your,
yes, and
yeah.
Trinice is our gospel and R&B blues person. Um, and we've been very strongly supportive of Black Lives Matter and of the LGBT plus community. We really are working to be as inclusive and as respectful of everybody that we can. And I really feel very blessed with this faculty. I mean, they're amazing.
Mm,
And people
they
say
are.
to me, where did you get this faculty from? And I said, I didn't. They picked me. I didn't go out and look for them. They showed up, and then here they are. So as the community has grown and the work has grown, the kind of person who's attracted to the work is somebody who is open minded, flexible, wants to keep learning, wants to share. I mean, people like you and people like your colleagues that I've met, like Melissa
Yes,
Forbes.
Melissa. Yes,
Melissa Forbes is one of those open minded people.
yes, she is.
And that that is the kind of person that's attracted to the work.
Mm.
I don't get very many people who are like, well, I don't want to teach that. Good. Go find something
Go
else.
find go and annoy somebody else. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's worked out. It's worked out well, and I don't really know. 10 or 15 years from now, when I'm probably no longer on the planet, I don't know where it's going to go. But I feel like, kind of like I'm putting it out into the world, and it'll go wherever it needs to go. And I mean, it's the same with what you're doing with your broadcasts, with interviewing different people in different areas. Just the
Mm.
fact that you're doing that puts it out into the world, makes it easier for the younger people to come in and not have the same struggles that you had, because you had struggles too.
Yes, yes, I did. I was definitely made to feel an imposter within the
Mm-hmm.
academic world, but that's okay. That's fine. We've all moved on now. We've all moved on. I have
We
my
have moved
book.
on.
I have a
It's
book
true.
now. So,
Yeah, it's good.
some of those people that made me feel like an imposter don't even have a book.
That's right.
Yes. So just I'd like to kind of start wrapping this up only because you've given so much of your time and I have like literally so many questions for you, but I just want to ask a few more.
Okay, go ahead.
So how much has, we talked about voice science before. How much has that informed your teaching approaches and how important do you think that is to our training?
I would say that it informed my teaching a lot. It was very important for me when I worked with Dr. Sundberg to know that what I had developed on my own was what I had developed on my own. So, in other words, that I knew that what I felt and experienced was what I
Mm.
felt and experienced. I
Yeah.
had an objective evaluation, both in terms of seeing it with the scope and understanding the analysis on the piece of paper, which gave me enormous confidence. And I think that that keeps the process grounded in reality. So it's very important. Uh, then the application when we're working is, do we want to teach voice science as pedagogy? No. Do you really need to know that this is, your second format is higher than your first format? In my opinion, no. It's
Mm.
great if you can find that. You go on a machine and it tells you that. But unless we're going to carry the machine around with us all the time, we have to go by our own personal experiences.
Mm.
And so you learn to sing better by singing.
Mm.
And
Exactly.
in the same way that I read all the traditional vocal pedagogy from all the well known experts, classical, going all the way back to Garcia and Lamperti, all the way up to present moment, Warren Brown, and people who have been highly respected in the pedagogical community for decades. But all of that information was aimed at classical singing. So does that inform who I am? Yes. Does it inform my teaching? Yes. But then the rest of it, the information that I gathered while singing gospel music with the Broadway people and singing jazz with other people or whatever else I turned up, also informed what I'm doing. So I understood that in working with somebody, and also I did a lot of work on my body. Alexander technique and Feldenkrais and different kinds of yoga and massage therapy and different kinds of physical movement systems, dancing of
Hmm.
all different kinds. So I
Wow.
was always learning about my body as my body was getting older and changing. It's like, oh, I didn't used to be able to do that, and now I can. Or, gee, I used to be able to do that, and now I can't.
Yes.
Staying informed about the somatic process as you go through your life, you can't ever run out of that because your body's always going to help you either be a good singer or not.
Mm.
So now
Well,
as I'm
it is
older,
our instrument.
yeah,
After all, people forget that. They think it's from
I'm
here up.
I know I'm having to adapt to having a senior citizen body and recognize, can't do that anymore. Okay, okay, at least I know that. And so that's another key component of the application, which is, are you going to work with somebody who's maybe a really great singer but who just had a baby and is now finally coming back and their whole body's in a disarray? How does that work? You have to find out where they are then. And same thing with working with somebody who's a dancer, could be different than working with somebody who is a librarian. Maybe they equally gifted vocally and musically,
Mm.
but how does that body work when it comes
Mm.
to singing?
Yeah.
Some
And
people who are very physically fit are not very physically fit when it put that same kind of behavior towards singing,
yes, exactly.
right?
Exactly. And also too how body aware, the difference between how body aware a dancer is as opposed to a librarian.
Yeah.
And so you said that you've studied so many different things. What is one thing that you feel like, oh, I really want to go and study that, either because I haven't studied it yet or I want to learn more about it? Is there something that piques your interest right now?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Um, I guess if I had a magic wand
Yes.
and I could poof and turn into some magic place, I would love to go back and take more acting lessons. I haven't taken acting lessons since I was in my 20s. I'd like to see who I would be as an actor now at this point in my life, and really just explore, what kinds of characters could I play, and maybe sing also,
Mm-hmm.
maybe as a music theater performer, but as an older person,
Mm-hmm.
and just take different kinds of acting classes. Like, I know I
Yes.
studied a few different techniques, but not extensively. And I think that would be, I also would like to take training in how to do voiceovers, like how to use your voice for commercials or in a
Mm-hmm.
film, but not
Yes.
necessarily be on camera. That
Yes.
that would pull me. I'd be like, oh, let's go look at that.
You would be very good at that. I love listening to your voice, and I love the way it moves through so many different pitch changes.
It
And
goes
once
all over.
again, I have to say that's the Italian too, because
Yep.
we are
Yep.
very expressive. And but when you put on your English accent, it doesn't really move very much in pitch range at all. So
No.
that cultural difference is evident,
Yep.
100%. And
Yes.
you said too you've had some health issues. So,
Mhm.
and you are a really busy person. You're still doing so much. Your career is never ending. What do you do for you? And what do you do for self-care?
Well, what I had been doing was I go for regular chiropractic adjustments,
Mm-hmm.
and I used to go for fairly regular massages.
Yes.
My husband and I are avocational ballroom dancers, so we used to love doing that. All of that got squashed when COVID happened,
Yes.
and then I had hip replacement surgery in August of 2020, and unfortunately, the surgeon screwed up.
Oh,
So I didn't really fully recover, and I have gone all over the place trying to get a better result from other doctors.
mm-hmm.
But nobody seemed, the consensus seems to be I'm stuck with what I have. So my ability to get around is quite compromised. And so, in terms of self care, right now, what I'm trying to do is adapt to um, the limitations that I have and try to take care of myself. So, okay,
Yes. Wow.
I have to walk with a
Mm.
cane. Okay, so now I have to
Yes.
go to make sure I go slowly when I go up the stairs or go down the stairs. And that actually takes a lot of awareness. The
Mm.
other thing I try to do at least a little bit is vocalize. Oh, la, 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 la. I try to keep the instrument alive because it makes me feel good. And I also feel like if I'm going to demonstrate, I want to know that it have a half a chance of having it come out the way I'd like.
Yes.
Um, I've been, it's almost 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with a small spot on my left vocal fold that doesn't work right. And it was probably caused by a vocal fold hemorrhage that was generated out of very severe bronchitis.
Oh,
And I was coughing and coughing, and I did everything. I couldn't have handled it with more holistic and Western medicine, and I still couldn't really not cough. So I broke a blood vessel on one of the vocal folds, and probably that has contributed to this one spot that doesn't vibrate properly in my middle range.
right.
So I had to adapt to that as well. And um, the music theater music that I lived in all my life, which was my heart and soul, a lot of it is completely unsingable now. I cannot sing it. And that's heartbreaking, but I can manage with other styles, and I can manage if I don't push on myself too much. So that's also something that would be the self care element of, okay, I can't do what I can't do. Now let's find out what I can do.
Mm.
And that's an attitude that I have about teaching also, is I always try to tell the teachers that are working with me, find what the student can do first. Find out what they can do. And so, and if you start with, even with beginners, find out what, can they go louder? Can they go softer? Can they speed up? Just with your speaking voice.
Yes.
Can they go up a little or down a little? And then from that, poke something new, poke something different. You know, sometimes if you ask somebody just to slow down, they don't know how to do that. Because in speech, we hardly ever have a reason to talk very slowly. But that's closer to singing, right?
Mm,
So I always try to get them to look at glass half full first. And then if they're going to make a change, to look at it as accommodating the capacity that the person has while you introduce new behavior, rather than fixing something that's wrong. Because already that's a bad attitude to begin with.
mm.
You know, you've
Yes.
given the attitude the person's not adequate because something's wrong and you have to fix it. No,
Mm,
take a look at, okay, well, your throat's not too cooperative over there. Maybe we can make it easier for your throat. Let's do this. So that you introduce something which unconsciously supports the fact that when you go back to the activity, the student goes, oh, now I can do it better. I said, oh, how about that?
mm. I bet you wished you had those teachers,
I did.
because
I
you,
do.
you had the opposite of all of that. Everything you just said was the total opposite of the type of training that you received. So, do you believe that is probably the number one quality that a good teacher needs to possess?
Yeah, I mean, I used to come out of singing lessons and go into the hallway and cry,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, that's a good lesson.
And it wasn't because I was trying with my whole being to do what the teacher said. And I was trying so hard to really be a good singer. And then I was criticized and put down and compared to other people. And I was just so sensitive when I was singing. And I really vowed, if I ever teach, I'm never going to teach like that.
Mm, mm,
I'm never going to put
yeah.
somebody down because they're not good enough. Although I have to be honest with people and say, you know what? Your chest register is asleep today. Can we wake it up?
But that's a kind way of approaching it. It's not like saying, your chest register sucks.
Right,
Don't ever, you know,
right.
what are you doing? What are you thinking? And
Yeah.
shaming. Yeah.
No, I just absolutely, that's a very important aspect of the work, which is to find a way to speak, always be honest
Mm,
and say what you see, say what you hear. So the student comes in and you think, jaw is so tight today. I would say, hey, what'd you do over the weekend? Your jaw doesn't want to let go.
mm.
Oh, I had a fight with my boyfriend.
Yes, yes,
I say, well,
yes.
all right, let's massage. Let's talk to your jaw. Come on, let's do this. And
Mm,
then the person gets to see, oh, okay, something happened, but I can address that. Not like, why are you having these jaw problems? This is terrible. You have to speak, can't sing like that. Ugh.
mm. So, in all these years, your brilliant career, and you've done so much, you've achieved so much. What do you think will be your legacy?
Hmm. I guess what I would like to say that my legacy would be that I was helpful.
Oh, definitely.
That's all.
That
Just
yes, that definitely. And I would say every time someone hears the term CCM, that term is linked directly back to you. And I know when every time I do a voice conference, whether people know it or not, and I'm sure they all know, I always say this is where it's come from. And
well, thank
Jeanette,
you. That's very
yeah,
sweet.
every
I
single presentation, I credit it to you and the why.
thank you. My my understanding at that time was that if I made it be about me, nobody would adopt the term. That it was very important that not be associated with me, so that people could not know I created it. Sort of like the word vocology that Dr. Titsa created.
Mm,
You know, it's not Ingo Titsa's vocology, it's just vocology.
mm,
And somatic voice work, yes, the LoVetri method, but people just talk about somatic voice work because it's universal. It's anybody working with somatic voice work or anybody talking about CCM And so when I think, well, what would I like my legacy to be? I would like my legacy to be that I was helpful, that I served a higher good, and that I did it in as with an attitude of, uh, I guess, gratitude.
Mm.
That I was able to finally give back in a way that maybe I thought was missing. Something was
Yes.
a hole
Yes.
there,
Yes. Yes. No, I
and
totally get that. I totally get that because, and service is really important and giving back because that's what we need to do. If we've had a brilliant career and people have been kind to us, we need to also repay that favor to the community. And that's what
well,
keeps it moving forward.
yes,
So important to be of service. And people worry about the money, but the money will come and you don't do it from that place. You have to do it from a
right,
place of giving, and the money will follow if you do it from the right place.
yeah. You have to look at everybody who's ever done anything of value has had to sacrifice to
Mm.
get there, and then they have the opportunity to give back. And so, I mean, I would never have imagined that my life and my career was going to go where it went. To me, it looks like,
Yes, yes.
but having the opportunity now to look this way when there's many more years behind me, then I'm not going to have another 73 years going forward. You can look back and say, well, maybe things are a little different now than they would have been if I hadn't been where I am.
Mm. Mm.
And more than that, I don't think you can ask, you know.
Exactly. Yep.
Um, I'm
Yes.
supposed to write a book. I have a book contract with Compton, but I got interrupted first with my hip and then with COVID. But hopefully, I would also say my legacy will be my book if I ever get it done.
Mm.
No,
Yes.
we'll
Well,
see.
that's amazing. Well, Noel be a very lucky man to have you as an author that's
Well,
published
he's
through
been
his.
very patient. I had to write to him and say, I'm really sorry, but I can't provide this book because blah 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 blah.
Mm.
And he's been
Mm.
very generous and
Yes.
understanding. But it's still
Yes.
on my agenda. I'm still
Good
gonna.
on you. Good on you. So, in
And
winding up,
yes,
okay, I'm going to ask you three more questions, and that's
okay,
it. I promise. So,
all
what are
right.
you up to next? So, there's the book.
Well, now what the next thing is that's really immediate is the webinars that I start with on Monday. I have 4 free webinars. Then after that is the Institute, which is in July. It's 9 days in July.
What
And
dates?
it starts on the 9th, July 9th to July 17th.
And people can still book.
Yeah,
Okay.
the website is uh, on the college website.
Yes. And
So
I'll
it's
share the links. I'll share
yeah,
the links in the show. Yep. I
www.bw.edu/LoVetri.
I will share all your links, Jeanie, in my
Okay.
show notes.
And then after that, I don't have any specific plans, but I have. Well, a lot depends on how I do if I have to travel. I don't know what my hip will
Are
let me
you
do.
going to ICVT?
No, I'm going to go to the Voice
Oh.
Foundation in Philadelphia just to see
Mm-hmm.
how I do,
Mm-hmm.
because that's only 2 hours away by car.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I will be in a plane traveling a long distance because, generally speaking, a few hours and then I really have to move around.
Yes.
And then, um, so I have my student Moran in Israel waiting for me to come to Israel. And the Brazilians would like me to come back to Brazil. So I don't know. Right now, I don't have anything beyond the Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll
So
see how I do.
one foot forward at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And so you, with all your wisdom, what is the greatest piece of advice you would like to offer our singing voice community? Like something we could do better or something that you strongly believe in?
I would say to you, the thing that we all have to remember is both the Hindu scriptures and the Christian Bible say, in the beginning was the word, or in the beginning was the sound. And science tells us we started with the Big Bang. So that we must remember that our sound is our spirit in our body. Your voice, the vibration of your voice, is your soul made manifest as sound. So when you are true to your voice and true to your word, that is to say, you tell the truth, then you are speaking from the most empowering point of view that exists. And when you speak, knowing that, you know that you are speaking from a loving truth, you are creating reality. That is this essence. Everything in the universe is a vibration, a particle or a wave. So when you speak and you say anything, it could be something like, that was a great lesson. That energy of that sound coming from you straight through and in your own voice, in your own body, comfortably and happily, literally creates a reality for the other person to go, oh, that was a great lesson. And that's the essence of this work. The essence of this work is to find your voice, raise your voice, share your voice, cherish your voice, and and basically tell the truth in each moment as yourself. That's all you can ask. And it doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you never trip up and say something stupid or lie or whatever. We all do those things. But when your intention is to be of service and you're impeccable with your word and your sound, you're operating at the essence of creativity in the whole universe. More than that, you cannot do.
Wow. That is absolutely beautiful. And it is so in line with the messaging behind my podcast.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautifully said. Wow, wow, wow. So powerful and so true.
Well,
Well,
that is why musician and magician come from the same source in English. And
ah,
those of us that are working with music are working with magic. And so when we're working with sound and we're working with music and voice, that is the essence of all that is in the world. And if we hold it that way, regard it in a kind of a sacredness, that's as much as you can ask.
beautiful. Well, Jeanie, I'm going to let you go. You've been
Yes, thank you. Because I
so
gotta feed my
kind.
husband.
Oh, Jerry, poor, oh, we can't let him go hungry. Oh, my goodness. If he's like my husband, he'd be roaring like a wounded bull right now.
Well, I think he might be just taking a nap. I'm not sure. But
Oh,
anyway,
my
it's time
gosh.
for us to eat.
No, thank
Thank
you
you for
so
this.
much. Much love to you. And I hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Yes, that would
And
be
we'll share
wonderful.
all your information, especially
Thank you.
to the Institute, in the show
Yep.
notes. Okay,
Thank you,
thank you,
dear.
Jeannie.
Mwah.
Good night.
Lots of
Mwah.
love.
Lots of love
Bye.
to you. Bye.
Bye.